The social modeling theory, social modeling approach, emphasizes the importance of observing and modeling the behavior of others. It explains human behavior in terms of continuous reciprocal interaction, so ongoing back and forth interaction between cognitive, behavioral, and environmental influences. And names we associate with social modeling include Albert Bandura and Rotter. Bandura has said that learning would be an exceedingly laborious process, not to mention hazardous, if people had to rely solely on the effects of their own actions to inform them what to do. Okay? If we had to basically live by learning everything that we did, then life would be even more difficult and would be dangerous. So rather than doing that, most human behavior is learned observationally through modeling. We watch other people and learn by watching and observing. From observing others, one forms an idea of how new behaviors are performed, and on later occasions this coded information serves as a guide for action. So rather than trying and experiencing everything ourselves, a lot of what we learn and base our behavior on is based on observing others and seeing what happens to them. You are what you watch, and that's another famous social psychology study about social learning, and the children who watched models with the I think it was called the Bobo clown, but the punching bag clown, and then acted with the clown as the models did, an example of social learning. In this process, the elements of learning behavior include basically four elements. First of all, we have to be paying attention in order to learn. So what is it that we are most likely to pay attention to? Generally, humans will pay attention to things that are interesting, colorful, dramatic. So things that grab and retain our attention. The model has to have a number of characteristics in order for us to learn from that model. The model should be similar to us. We should see the model as like us. The model should be competent in our view, and the model should be attractive to us. And the behavior that is learned would be seen as functional. So I'm more likely to attend to information if it is interesting to me. The model is someone I can see as being like myself, but generally someone like myself but a little better or a little different in a way that I want to be better or different. And the behavior that is being modeled is behavior that I can see would be useful for me or would benefit me. So when you think about classic uses of social learning, like television advertising, commercials, think about the content, you think about the models and the situations that are used, and the behavior. So what is it that is going to get you to use this soap or shampoo? Think about the content of the commercials. The second element is retention. We have to retain the information. We store this information. We store what we have seen the model doing in the form of mental images or verbal descriptions, and at some time in the future we recall and reproduce that behavior. So we see the commercial, we go to the store, and when we're at the store we do what the model did. We purchase the soap and the shampoo, and we go home and use it the way that the model did, and hope to get the same results. So we reproduce, and if we do have good results, if we like the consequences of the behavior, that behavior is reinforced, then it will be reproduced. And then the fourth element is motivation. Seeing and recalling the model being reinforced, so something vicarious. past reinforcement or promised reinforcement. So past rewards for a certain behavior, promised rewards for behavior, rewards that we anticipate receiving in the future, or vicarious reinforcement because it worked for them and they were reinforced. We see and recall that, and we experience vicarious reinforcement. And some examples from, not necessarily from advertising, but give you an idea of the sort of approaches where social learning is used. And as I said, advertising is a classic example. Sports figures and attractive models and situations that we would like to see ourselves in. So the major concepts across all of these behavioral approaches that we've talked about so far, common themes and major concepts in behavior therapy are that, first of all, many types of abnormal or problematic ineffective behaviors are seen not as mental illnesses, certainly not seen as based on psychological factors going on outside our awareness, but they are problems with behaviors that are not working. They are problems of living. Psychopathology is learned behavior. Most abnormal problematic behavior is learned and maintained in the same way as normal and effective behavior. And abnormal problematic behavior can therefore be treated through applying behavioral interventions. People can learn new and more effective and less pathological, for example, ways of behaving. So if illness is learned, then health can be learned. Assessment in behavior therapy is based on the current determinants of behavior, not historical ones. We are interested in what is influencing the behavior, what is reinforcing the behavior in the present. It doesn't really matter what happened in the past. Again, current behavior is based on current determinants, and that's where we're going to spend our time in assessment. Assessment is specific, detailed, and contextual. What is causing this person to act this way at this time in this situation, and what can we do right now to change this behavior? The view of personality from the behavior therapy perspective is that personality development is deterministic, and I've mentioned that we talked about determinism in psychoanalysis and behavior therapy. In psychoanalysis, our behavior is determined by forces outside our conscious awareness. In behavior therapy, people are determined by their environment and experiences with it. So we are determined by things that are in the environment, the interactions that we have with it. Individual differences are derived from different experiences. Different people will interact with the environment and find that different things are rewarding or reinforcing, not reinforcing, but it is the same process that works for everybody, but individual differences do derive from our different experiences. The process of therapy in behavior therapy is again, this is going to be a fairly goal-oriented, specific approach, generally to a specific problem. And this is generally a short-term therapy, and it works by following generally this process of beginning with a systematic, detailed assessment. What is happening in the environment? What is happening in this situation? We clarify the problem, we gather information, we define the target behavior. So what is it that we would, what would be the appropriate or effective behavior in this situation? What is the behavior that we would prefer to express or prefer to see? We form goals. We identify maintaining conditions. So the current behavior is happening because there is some reinforcement, or because the behavior takes away some negative reinforcement. That is what is maintaining this behavior in this situation, and so we need to change that. We need to change that response in the environment. We implement a change plan. We come up with some plan for change. We implement the change plan, and then we evaluate. Sometimes the plan needs to be adjusted or corrected. Sometimes, if it is working well, we need to maintain it and make sure that the behavior has developed, the goal behavior has developed, and then closure planning for if the behavior reemerges or we start to see the behavior again, what are we going to do, and then follow up. From a behavioral perspective, along the lines that we've been talking about, behavior being a consequence of the environment, disability can be seen and is seen from a behavioral perspective along these lines. Disability produces 3 obstacles to a comprehensive rehabilitation from this functional approach. Disability can be seen as leading to a need to acquire new behaviors, a need to reacquire old behaviors, or a need to eliminate problematic behaviors that arise as a result of or in the course of living with a disability. So behavioral perspective on disability is that the disability basically leads to a change in behavior, and we might need to learn new behaviors because the old behaviors, the prior behaviors, are no longer effective. We might need to relearn behavior from the past because there's been some interruption, or we may need to learn to eliminate problematic behaviors, change the way that we're behaving by eliminating behavior. Disability may, of course, produce profound emotional changes due to the failure of old learning, and so we keep trying to behave in the ways that we have always behaved, but they are no longer functional, they are no longer working for us, and this leads to emotional responses like frustration, anxiety, depression. Because the reinforcers have changed, we have a need to acquire new skills and new ways of living, and the therapeutic response to this situation is to help the client to learn new behaviors, learn new skills, learn new ways of living to develop increased competence, confidence, and self-esteem. There are a variety of behavioral techniques that we talk about in the behavior therapy. These are generally techniques designed to modify, challenge automatic thoughts, maladaptive beliefs, and encourage new learning. In the classical conditioning approach, we talked about our identified systematic desensitization, flooding, and aversive therapy, useful in anxiety and phobia. From the operant conditioning perspective, the token economy is an approach that is sometimes very effective and used in I know it's been used in rehabilitation counseling settings like community rehab programs, supported employment, and rehab facilities. And what the token economy is, if you engage in some behavior, you're reinforced with tokens, and then you are able to collect and use the tokens to make purchases, for example, at the store. So some variation on that theme. You are given some reinforcement that you can use then for a reward. Homework, again, is going to be frequently used in behavior therapy. to keep the behavior conscious in the person's mind, to keep the person aware of and thinking about the behavior. Homework is frequently used. You may be asked to monitor activity. How many times did this behavior occur? You may get into activity scheduling. And the idea here is either to track and get a baseline of the behavior, or to begin a process of increasing or decreasing behavior according to a schedule. Role play and rehearsal, certainly useful in learning new behaviors in social interaction, or practicing behaviors, for example, practicing interview techniques, practicing confrontation, practicing assertiveness, and job seeking, job maintaining, and interpersonal skills, for example. Modeling, frequently used from a behavioral perspective. Again, this is frequently used videotaping, rehearsals of effective job interviews, for example, and then watching people who have good skills and the skills that we want to learn in these contexts. So watching effective models and then modeling that behavior. Self-monitoring, recording reactions, efforts, results, problems. So a lot of behavior therapy involves careful tracking. When and how many times did this behavior occur? Relaxation training, job clubs, and behavior modification programs. These sort of behavioral interventions that you'll be learning about in the techniques course. Behavior therapy, general, has certainly been used frequently and effectively in rehabilitation counseling. Generally, the applications that have been where behavior therapy has most frequently been applied and effectively been employed include working with habits and addictions, fears and phobias, teaching socially appropriate behavior, work skills, and reducing inappropriate behaviors and work skills.